Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Rise News. I am Adekoya Omorwan.
I'm Rafai Yoseni.
And I'm Shaitan Atigari. Good morning.
Now, President Muhammadu Buhari last week launched the National Security Strategy 2019. This move has been commended by security experts and analysts who see it as a step to intensify his administration's effort at ending insecurity in the country.
The closure of Nigeria's borders with neighbouring countries is part of the new strategy contained in the security document. The new strategy will tackle transnational organised crimes such as terrorism, illegal oil bunkering, crude oil theft, illegal fishing, kidnapping, hostage-taking, armed robbery, cybercrime and smuggling, which have become major threats to national security. It will also address the issues of money laundering, financial crimes, drug and human trafficking, piracy, environmental pollution, and proliferation of small arms and light weapons, which are the other major security threats confronting the country.
According to the President, the National Security Strategy of 2019 is a product of painstaking and rigorous deliberations by relevant stakeholders committed to the task of safeguarding Nigeria from both internal and external threats. So joining us now to discuss the National Security Strategy as it affects the citizens is Onyekachi Adekoya, a security expert and consultant. Great to have you. Let me start from that part of the script there. Painstaking and rigorous. Onyekachi, how painstaking and rigorous was this? Were you consulted?
No, at least not to the best of my own knowledge. I wasn't consulted. But I think that they did have some engagements. Not sure it was very painstaking. I think I listened to the presidential spokesman on one of his commentaries on the NSS. Mm-hmm. And so what he had said was that all relevant agencies tasked with security were engaged. Some government MDAs that had to do with security were also engaged. I didn't hear that they engaged the civil society.
He did mention in his press statement.
No, I didn't specifically. I looked at it again and again. It wasn't mentioned at the first time. There's a video shared just before coming on set. I didn't hear that the legislative arm was engaged. Some members of the judiciary, perhaps. Expressly, when I looked at stakeholders, the Nigerian the Association of Licensed Private Security Practitioners of Nigeria, which employs almost 1.5 million Nigerians, I'm not sure anybody was engaged. I'm a member of that association. And
do you hold a position in that association?
I do hold it in the Lagos zone.
Okay.
There's no official record to show that we're engaged. Why is it very important? The National Security Strategy, it's not an executive document only. It's a strategy document for the whole Nigeria. I think in 2000, Obasanjo created a policy called a Grand Strategy for Security, where he had defined security as the aggregation of individual interests. So you must look at regional interests, state interests, national interests, then sub-regional interests, and African interests. So in the developing and crafting of this one document. So in terms of painstaking engagement, I mean, maybe the government has to explain how painstaking was.
But have you seen the document? This was a review of the 2014-2015 existing strategy. Yeah. So you have seen the document. Yes. The NSA, Major General Mongunu, says that this is a shift from state-centric to human focus.
Yes.
To what extent is this? Because we cannot talk about human focus security strategy without talking about personal safety of citizens and the rule of law.
Good.
With all that is happening, to what extent does this document really, really portray human-centric security strategy for Nigeria?
I don't think, based on what we have seen, there's any significant shifts. What I see is an idealistic document created with a vision, perhaps, of what should be, but not what is currently obtainable. In any case, that's what the National Security Strategy should be. It should be born out of a clear vision, the president's vision. You know, and some would argue that perhaps this document was created for the president without his express input. Yes, you can argue that he could delegate people, but his imprint has to be seen in the document itself because it's born out of his vision for the country. And it's a 5-year strategy document. Okay, so sometimes when you look at the fundamental assumptions held in that document, how futuristic is it really? Yes, the statement of problem has been clearly defined. The transnational crime, proliferation of small and light weapons, the issues in the Sahel, terrorism, kidnapping. Yeah, we say it's people-centric. Now, my concern is, I don't think it's really people-centric. I think it's more espoused than real. If you talk about national security, whose security are we talking about here? We're talking about the people. So the people have inputs into that document. If you're talking about my security, I should have some level of input into it.
Exactly.
So it's more or less like an executive document. It's not really people-centric. I beg to differ a bit. With due respect to the good work which has been done, we must commend the government. Again, smiling sometimes, I say that Rome wasn't built in one day. We're coming from 2000 to 2004. 2014, sorry.
Yes,
Obasanjo first set the strategy in place in 2000. 2014, the document has been reviewed. We may not get it right at once, but we're at least headed in some right direction. The point I want to bring out is, if you say it's a people-centric strategy, what do we mean? It means we're talking about the people, their safety, their aspirations, their health, education, access to amenities, welfare, and even jobs.
But that was embedded in that document, because I've read through that document. It's over 60 pages. I mean, that was embedded in that document. They talked about, you know, the security of the economy.
Correct.
You know, the fact that the economic viability of the people has a knock-on effect on security.
Correct.
They even talked about security as regards, you know, economic potential of culture and tourism.
Correct.
Cyber security and the prevalent realities of today.
Yes.
So why are you saying it's only people said?
Everybody talks about that every time. We security analysts come on air. We always talk about the knock-on effect, the links between security, macroeconomics and security. In fact, there are people beginning to promulgate a small notion, a small catchphrase, which is securematics. When you talk about security or securenomics, security and the economy, that's known and that's well espoused. Now, at the National Security Committee, where this document was created, did we have private security experts there? Did we have private...
What imputes?
Sorry. Do we have members of the health sector represented? Do we have members of the educational sector represented? Do we have members of the banking sector represented? Because when you talk about security, security is an enabler of business. It's an enabler of economic development. You can't have prosperity without security. And so when you talk about a national strategy, it must be very broad-based. You must seek the wide input of private practitioners into that document. At least they know, for example, the persons on the government side understand more government regulations and what government wants to do. The person in practice knows where government regulations and excessive red tape is affecting him or her. So when you talk about people-centric, how do you unlock the economy? We are shutting down the borders, which is how it is maybe somewhat expedient for the now. Okay, but how do you match shutting the borders with driving economic development in the era where you are approaching the African continental free trade area? So how do you juxtapose that?
No, security is also not about...
Because you say the private security experts were not consulted. You're saying this was not far-reaching enough in terms of consultations. What is missing? Like Rufai was trying to hint. What would have you brought to the table?
Yes.
What would you have brought to the table? Good
question. So first thing is, we must commend the government first of all. I'm saying it's not yet a perfect document. It's a good document. We're headed in the right direction. What would the private practitioner bring in? Private focus. Government will talk about, it's like you look at businesses today. When a taxman comes to your doors, all he wants is his tax. He doesn't care about what issues you face. You're faced with FRS, you're faced with NHF, you're faced with NSITF, you're faced with ITF, you're faced with whatever sectoral regulations you have to bear and renewals of license you have to put up with. So there's so many things you're faced with. Now, the private sector, if I speak in terms of security, for example, employing 1.5 million people across Nigeria. We employ more than the Army, the DSS, the NSCDC, all of them put together. And I can dare say that we secure almost 80% of Nigerians' GDP. If you don't take input from that sector and you call it a national strategy, then I think that you are missing something. To that extent, collaboration should be expanded. They have done a good job, but there's a lot more to be done. When you put a table of different sectors, when it comes to the level of ideas generation, and cross-fertilization of ideas, you have a richer mix to pull from. Not people who are career civil servants. I mean, I'm a business person.
Give us an instance, because I do understand what you're trying to say, but you haven't hit the target yet. What exactly is missing that you would have brought to the table? So
clearly what I'm saying is you're missing inputs from the private sector.
And
what is this input?
So it's multi-sectoral based now.
What is
I can't speak for the health sector. I can speak for security.
Okay, speak for your sector.
Let me speak for my own sector, for example. Let's look at the police case in point. Now we're talking about personal security. The government did come out to say that they're going to try to increase the police strength to about 400,000. The way we are currently today, I think we have barely 350,000 policemen. The policemen we have are not enough to do the jobs which we need them to do. More so, we can argue that about 50% of the police force are currently engaged in protecting persons, VIPs, and different interests. So in terms of real police job, even though police don't have enough persons, can you begin to chunk out some of the core mandates given to the police to the private sector? For example,
like carrying arms?
Maybe it's a bit of a sensitive issue, but
like
we will get to that point. Yes. We will get to that point.
You remember what happened with Blackwater?
Blackwater is an American contractor which was engaged in a theater of warfare. I mean, that's why you see, you must engage. You must engage. The South African economy has a very robust private security sector. The UK economy has that. The American economy has that. So, I mean, you're talking about people-centric security. Employment opportunity is also very important. I'll give a case in point. The policemen that you engage, the private sector pays them some allowance. The government pays them some allowance. That's double taxation. Why pay people to be paid again? That's double payment. Why don't you create a clear line, a clear departure from taxing the taxpayer for times 2? Do you understand? So there's a huge sector that can be unlocked in that space. That's one. 2. We have a law that says that if you're not a licensed company, you cannot operate in Nigeria as a security company. But there are some issues currently we face. You have a number of companies that are not licensed, operating in Nigeria today, and some of those issues we'll begin to deal with. Okay, in terms of enabling even the private security business, input should have been there.
So because we're going for a break in 2 minutes, I know Shaitan wants to come in. Let me make a case for you, and let me play devil's advocate in your favor, if that's to say. We have been using some of these private security firms in, deeper forms of security. And I'll give you an instance of OMSL that does, securitization of the waterways in tandem with the Navy. Which now has some issues with with NIMASA and NBA. So that is constantly on, but isn't it a security threat? Leaving a big chunk of our security, allowing personal, private security people carry weapons in an economy where you see the conduct of some of these private security people. You see that they are coming from the hellhole of hunger and poverty. You must give me instances where the private security people have acted out of order. But now, in terms of national security... Oh, there are too many instances. Sorry. Compared to the government sector. We'll come back from the break. We'll go for a quick break. We'll come back. We'll have this conversation even more. Okay.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still joined by Onyekachi Adekoya, a security expert and the private sector and the public sector when it comes to security. And you are of the notion that we should have private security firms handle some of these things. Rufai doesn't agree. Can you land on that point? Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is when you look at NSS as a strategy, as a policy document, part of what the national security strategy is predicated upon is upon interest. It's upon means. Yes, interest, means, and context. So let's not take away context on what we're talking about. Let me set our national security in a bit of a context. The government security agencies are stretched, currently stretched in the northeast, stretched in the northwest. We're still having issues in the southwest with kidnapping. Of course, there's the issue in the Niger Delta. You have the issues in the Gulf of Guinea. They're stretched everywhere. And even in terms of internal security, the police is stretched. Now, how do we become smart on our national security spend? Do we have the means to achieve
all of the objectives we set out ourselves in that document. We must look for ways outside the box to begin to address some of these issues. So the question is, what would the private sector bring to the table? It's ideas on out-of-the-box thinking. When you cross-fertilize ideas from the regimented government sector and you mix it with private sector, a bit with civil society organization, a bit with some part of legislative, at the onset of American developed its own national security strategy, a lot of input was coming from legislature. So, by the time you have a robust, well-rounded document that covers all inputs, because it's our document, it is not owned by the executive. It's an application of... Yeah.
As it stands, we already have these government officials that lack serious training. So if we decide to give everything off to the private sector, doesn't it become a case of monopolization of power, where the private sector is now fully in charge of what these security officials do while they're out on the streets? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you mean, but you see, it's a strategy document, and in a strategy document, you set out how to. It's a ways and means document. How do we get there? It would not happen overnight. But what's the 5-year plan? What's the 10-year plan?
So who would be responsible for the funding, the government or these private sectors?
So that's even the essence of the whole argument we're having. Government is suffering from gross paucity of funds. The president is seeking to borrow another additional $30 billion. The truth is security costs money. And we've not even started to dimension the issues.
It's already coming there. The DMO has just recently said it's part of the short and medium term expense is still within range.
Fair
That's
enough,
what the DMO said.
What's the argument? You're arguing against GDP or against revenue.
That's what the DMO has
Don't
said.
forget I'm also an economist by training.
That's what the debt management officer said. Concerning that.
Well, the government has said majority of that money will go into infrastructure.
Yeah, that's what the debt management
I hope we don't end up paying salaries with it.
Okay, we all hope.
No, they said no recurrence.
But talking about the strategy, this was the 5-year review.
Correct, of 2014 bill.
Imagine threats in security that we have. Should we wait every 5 years to review this document? How often should we review? And yes, a lot of people have commended this document, including you, the strategy.
Yes.
But there are those who will tell you it goes beyond the document. How about the execution of it?
Yeah, so you see, that's why you see, I think that the framers did face reality a bit. They were a bit more concerned and restrained by current conditions. But I tell you, the strategy document is a futuristic document. It's a document that sets out a vision. It's more or less what some will call like a change management document, because you look at the problems, you look at the root cause, you look at probable solutions, you try and see how you adapt to those emerging threats against the solutions you have proposed, then you begin to implement. As you're implementing, you're also monitoring and evaluating. So what the document should do is to set a 5-year rolling plan as against the government's 5 years development plan, because security and development must go hand in hand, which is why I must begin to argue that even in the framing of that strategy document, you must have inputs from economists. You must have inputs from even people in the educational sector, because in the people-centric approach, we have identified that we have a gap created by the Alama jury system, which must be addressed. That system is becoming a source of risk, primarily to the north and to the nation at large. So when you identify some of those sources of risk, sources of concern, embedded in the drafting of solution should be subject matter experts that would give you industry insights and inputs into some of the issues, so that at the time you're framing, you see, the NSA should be far more than what it is currently. You have the DSS in their own silo, police, you have the Army, the DMI, NIA, everybody working almost at, everyone trying to please the headman.
So they're working at cross purposes, is that what you're saying?
To some extent, and always seeking political patronage. We will get to that point in this country where everything will stop at the office of the NSA, and he will be the one coordinating national security for this country. We're not there yet.
But let me take you on this real quickly, and that's a really strong point, which, while reading the documents, I didn't see, the relationship and the intermingling between these bodies.
Correct.
Because for one too many times, we have seen police and military officers go at it. In fact, there's a subtle war. And I'll give you an instance.
Yes.
Wadume's case. The police got Wadume. Kidnapping kingpin. It was said that an army officer,
Captain, yes,
led a charge to kill top police officers and get Wadume out. So, and this is why, using your time totally, They work at cross purposes. Till date, we have not seen the captain. He looks at everybody's mum about it. We've not heard the last of that Wadume's matter.
Context.
Talk to me about
context again. That's what I'm saying. When you set your challenges, you set them within a context, internal context. You're talking about internal security challenges. And clearly, they'll continue to work as cross purposes. In fact, the Wadume's case is just one case in point amongst many cases we're having. Look at the Sowore case. When we say that the rule of law is key to our national survival and enshrining democratic principles and ensuring the human rights of Nigerians, because it's a document that seeks to protect and project the interests of the common Nigerian. You then look at the issues of social order, social justice, and the total problems you have within the administration of criminal justice. So, born out of that should be security sector reform. And those should be guided by policy. So where there is a proper operational context set for every agency, where every person's duty is clearly spelled out, and then policies or maybe laws are enacted, born out of national security strategy, then we begin to have a sense of where we should head it. I'll give an example. The DSS claims that, they acted within the ambit of the law because, some part of the act setting them up says, and whatever responsibility given to them by the presidency. Okay?
That's an ambiguous clause.
So if you look at the way our laws are drafted, which is why you see, and I say this very carefully, the National Security Strategy is a document of policy that should come from the heart of the president. It sets out his vision for the nation, because then you are looking at national interests. You're looking at regional interests. You're looking at how do you project Nigeria's interests? How do you protect that interest? How do you ensure economic development? How do you ensure, in fact, it is mentioned that weak institutions are also a source of risk as stated in the National Security Strategy. So you're looking at engagement. When it comes to implementation, the real problem most experts will say is it's implementation of those fine ideas in the document. How do you carry the judiciary along? How do you look at judicial reforms as it affects our security interests and national interests? How do you look at economic reforms as it helps you and enables you achieve the people-centric objectives which you are pursuing? There must be, it's a fine balance you must achieve. So it involves everybody. So you look at interests. How do you cover local government interests? We have almost 250 ethnic groups in Nigeria. Okay, you have like 36 states plus the FCT.
You have 74 local government areas.
You have different interests. So how do you bring all these interests into a pot and melt it into a national security document that projects everyone's interest and protects it? So it's not enough to have a fine document in print. It won't translate to anything. So the challenge is enormous. And my point I'm making is that it is said it is people-centric, but I maintain that the core framers are still state-centric. And we would get to a point maybe in the next 5 years where some of these shortcomings will be addressed, and we're not giving the government a stick. We're saying we're commending the government for going in this direction. It started pretty much in 2014, set up by 2000 by Obasanjo's effort. We don't expect 2019 to be perfect, but, they must ensure that this painstaking engagement is truly what it is. Input must be taken in from the legislature. Input must be taken in from the judiciary. Some input must be taken from local government to understand local context. All threat to peace, they are local. So you must take local issues on board so that at the point of formulating strategy at the national level, you have a well-rounded view of the issues as it affects Calabar to Sokoto. You understand the challenges of the man in Yola, the sites that border the other West African countries. You understand the challenges that we have in the financial sector. Cybercrime is another major issue for us. Yes. How do we begin to address cybercrimes? What frameworks do we set in place to ensure we mitigate some of this risk? So the issues are plenty. So we probably won't leave here today if we continue.
We're going on a break really soon,
Yeah.
but very quickly, you've spoken about them working, these security agencies working in isolation.
Correct.
Now, information share is very important. If you look at the case of, Baghdad that was killed, we know that came about because these security operatives communicate with each other.
Yes.
How do we make that effective in Nigeria? Very quickly.
Yeah, good point. So you see the national security talks about ends. It deals with ends. It doesn't deal with ways. Ways are more tactical. Means are more logistical. That's an intermediate level kind of discussions you should be having. So, I mean, I've not seen enough in that document that sets out how there'll be interagency collaboration. It was talked about, but maybe at an operational level, maybe some things will be going on. But I make the point to say, until the NSA continues to substantively coordinate every other arm that has to do with security and be the go-to point for the presidency, not the Secretary of State to the federal government,
Secretary of
not even any presidential aide, until we get to that point where national security is driven from a policy...
Not the Chief of Staff. I'd like to say a very big thank you to you.